This is IAT806 lecture 8.3, and in this segment we're going to be talking about processing and going into Java mode. So let's get started with that. So we started processing in a very simple mode of use, and that is where you could put straight line code and for loops and such like, but not methods. And this is very simple, very easy to start with. You can type in 3 lines of code perhaps that do some graphics. Here we're just showing a line call, and press play and immediately get started. You get something right away, which is really beneficial for starting on how to use programming. You get success immediately, and that's a good way to start learning something if you're new to it. The next mode of Java we introduced was where you declare methods. And in that situation, you're no longer permitted to have methods sort of out in the global area, code that is intended to be run out in the general area. What you have to do is you have to put code that you're intending to run in a method, and generally speaking, that method ought to be called by setup or draw, or something that setup or draw calls, etc. So here we're showing, void setup with nothing in it, void draw. You put your drawing code in draw, it gets called 60 times or 30 times per second, and it calls the other methods that you define. And most of us have been using that for quite a while now. The next mode, although functionally it's not much different, is with classes, where we have, say, class emotion in this case. You can add class definitions to the method declarations to your code, and presumably, you can call a constructor on a class and get an object of that class and start using it in the rest of your code, in the rest of the methods in the system. And you could also do subclassing, and that is to say, extend happy from emotion here, and what that means is, you have the class emotion subclass happy. So what's really going on underneath the covers is that processing is actually a Java class with a lot of stuff in it, but it's a Java class. And so really what's going on is when you fire up processing, by default, you get some kind of name for the processing, the processing code. It starts as sketch something, but you can change it. And what's going on is that processing is creating a class named that sketch name that extends PApplet. And PApplet is a class that has been defined by processing, hence P for processing. And applet was a Java technology that allowed an application to run inside a web browser. Fundamentally, the concept's still the same. It's the idea that you can run an application. It's just that browsers don't really support that stuff anymore. Browsers have tended to get rid of support of kind of external running programs, and the browser people have decided that the best way to handle the possible problems with security and runtime efficiency and all that kind of good stuff is essentially to support their own scripting language, JavaScript, and just have that be the means by which you do programming and run code in a browser. So in essence, what's going on, getting back to processing, what's going on in processing is, if you're putting a void setup and void draw and defining methods and some classes and subclasses, what you're doing is you're actually defining that stuff to be within this class sketch, which extends PApplet. So what you're doing is, without explicitly saying so, that code is being put within this PApplet, within the PApplet that contains all that stuff. And so that's a real convenience, and that's the reason why each of these modes work right. Is you can, if you just have straight line code, say 3 lines of code, line, ellipse, ellipse, or something like that, what's happening is that code is being put into a skeleton setup that has already been defined within Sketch 2020. So both of those modes, the one with straight line code and the one with methods and classes and subclasses, both of those things, behind the scenes, what processing is doing is putting them into a Java container that it is previously defined. That is to say, the sketch that derives from PApplet, and running that, compiling that and running it. So Java mode is a mode of using processing which we haven't really talked about yet and haven't used, which allows you to program in pure Java with all the strengths and weaknesses that that implies. The strengths are that you get access to a lot of Java technology. The weakness is you have to do a lot of extra typing and get ready to speak, as it were, to program in real Java, as opposed to the kind of lightweight Java that we've been using throughout the term so far. So when you're using Java mode, that means you can import classes that are not normally imported into a processing app. Processing's library subsystem is actually pretty good at identifying libraries that work with the processing system, and so there's a lot of support for a lot of activities. But if there's something there that isn't supported within the processing system, you can now, by using Java mode, get access to it, and we'll talk briefly about how to do that. So I say import classes. That's the Java terminology. Importing means making a class available to your program, and the Java API docs tell you where the classes are, and they're essentially in a set of folders within the Java system that you put together when you are running, download the Java Software Development Kit. In Java mode, basically what you do is you can create a class explicitly that extends PApplet. So instead of having that happen behind the scenes, you do it overtly by saying, class myApplet extends PApplet. And as the little subtext here says, normally all processing applets extend PApplet behind the scenes. And setup and draw are methods of the class that extend PApplet that you would define in this situation. So here is a sample Java mode program. Class myProgram extends PApplet. You would actually write that explicitly in your code. Void setup, you define that within the PApplet. Void draw, you define that within the PApplet. And what you're doing in this case is overloading PApplet's draw with your own version of it. If you didn't define setup, you will end up using the default PApplet setup. That's what will get run when setup is called. The PApplet will automatically run setup. That's just part of the startup method for PApplet. And then you can create, your own top-level method, and you can also create classes and subclasses within the PApplet definition. So, class text, xpos, ypos, string, word, and all the stuff that goes on with the text class that you want to create. So all of these things, classes that you define, subclasses, are defined within this subclass that you've defined that derives from PApplet. So why would you use Java mode? Well, one of the reasons is that it gives you access to the entire Java Software Development Kit. We need access to some Software Development Kit classes for HTML parsing if you wanted to do some of that, and processing doesn't make that visible by default, so you have to, sort of go get it, and that going into Java mode would be a means by which you would get it. Java mode also helps you understand how processing is built on top of Java. Sometimes it's valuable to kind of pull back the curtain to see what's going on behind the scenes, to see how it's done. And so all those magic functions, variables, are really just methods and fields of PApplet that your program inherits. So, width and height, the width of the screen, the height of the screen, those things are variables that are fields that are defined within PApplet. And because your own applet, Sketch 2020 or whatever it is, inherits from that, it inherits those fields, and you get access to them. So yeah, they're kind of magic, but I'm now telling you how the magic works. Okay. One of the real advantages of doing Java mode, if you need it, is that you get access to the vast amount of Java programming that other people have done, and that is done through the use of libraries. And libraries are other classes in either .java files, which are source code, or .jar files, which are typically a set of libraries that have been compiled and are archived together in a jar, or to spell that out, Java archive. And AR is a kind of an old school Linux term for archiving. And to get at them, you use essentially, the import statement. So Java, it's a Java keyword, import, name of library, dot name of method if you want to explicitly just sort of point at one method. Another thing that is very, very common is to, let's say I want to access some of video, but I don't want to waste my time saying which one of the methods I'm accessing. You say import, say the video library dot star, and star means all the stuff that's within the video library. Sometimes you'll have, name of library dot name of sublibrary dot, some method names, and so you can get more specification there. Now, with Java mode, you can also put your programs in multiple files. Java behind the scenes actually has a requirement that each class that is kind of intended to be used by other classes is in its own file, its own source file, with the name of the class equal to the name of that source file, .java. And what happens is the Java compiler compiles that into the name of the file, .class. So there's one-to-one correspondence between the source file .java and the compiled result .class. One of the things that Java does that's kind of interesting is when it fires up, it gathers all the class files together and binds them all together in a process called linking and loading, or link loading. And it sort of does that on the fly, and that's kind of an interesting feature of Java. It's something that people in the 1990s recognized. We've got enough resources, compute resources, to be able to do this quickly enough. So let's do that, because it has some advantages. Because what you can do is, if you decided that you wanted a new class, an updated class, you can just throw out the old one, put in a new one, and then the program will still run. And that's kind of an innovation that allows you to, upgrade things on the fly without having to recompile and rework everything. So what that means within the processing Java mode case is that you create new tabs or files with a button in the upper right of the processing window, and that enables you to create new tabs which have new files which have new stuff in them. A few of you have already done that, but I'm just simply pointing out that that's in Java mode, something that you would expect to do. Okay, so that's it for talking about processing and Java mode.